Hello there. So today let's quickly go to Kenya. Now, Kenya is one of the most developed countries in Africa. As a matter of fact, on a continent that is considered mostly for being third world, Kenya is one of the few countries that are not third world countries, as they are considered middle income countries, which include South Africa, Kenya, the northern countries in North Africa, that is Tunisia, Algeria, and of course you have Nigeria and Ghana. These are middle income countries. Some of them, like South Africa, are actually developed countries, and Kenya is one of those. So it's among the top 5 most developed, most promising countries in Africa. But that status could soon be history if what the Kenyan president is doing continues. Now, you do recall about 3 years ago that we had a case of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, once a promising tourist destination country, was thriving until they voted in a populist leader called Gotabaya. Now, they voted Gotabaya on campaign promising to change their lives. And his brother was also with him campaigning, and once they got to power, Gotabaya became the president. His brother was appointed as the prime minister, and his other brother, the third brother, became the minister of finance. So there were 3 brothers in control of Sri Lanka, and they quickly started working with a man from India called Gautam Adani. From this tweet you can see here, this is Adani himself basically talking about it. And the first deal they had was a 1.5 billion construction of a container terminal on one of the busiest ports in Sri Lanka, the Colombo port. And this new terminal was unneeded. It was unnecessary. Sri Lanka didn't need it because they were able to manage the traffic that they were getting from what was already in place. But guess what? Someone came up with a very bright idea that they needed another terminal at a cost of $1 billion. And the next day, rather definitely what followed, was that they also got another 1 billion from the same man and Adani to basically set up wind projects. These are wind power projects in Sri Lanka. And after that, they also got about 2.9 billion from the same man to set up the power distribution transmission lines. And this was all given to a company incorporated in Sri Lanka called Adani Green Energy Limited. So 1.5 billion for the port, 1 billion for something they don't need, that is a wind power, and then definitely another one for the distribution of the same power. So all those projects were given to Adani through single sourcing, and he went ahead to give them the loans, but definitely the project never came to completion and the money was stolen. That's what happened, and that is one of the reasons, or one of the things that led Sri Lanka to become bankrupt. It was unable to pay or service its debts, and the International Monetary Fund refused to keep extending them financial lifeline because they knew there was no way they were going to repay these massive debts, which most of them had been stolen by the leadership. So what followed was that Sri Lanka was unable to pay their police officers, their soldiers, their teachers, their doctors, and the hospitals were out of medicine. And quickly they ran out of fuel in petrol stations. Vehicles were stranded. You remember the videos we were watching. Vehicles were stranded in the streets, on the highways, because they ran out of fuel, because the country had no fuel, because the government did not have enough money to pay for this fuel. And that is the simple history of Sri Lanka. Now, Kenya is quickly hurtling towards that destination because the Kenyan president has met Adani, and Adani is telling him what to do. Basically, the same script that was done in Sri Lanka is now in Kenya. And the Kenyan president, William Ruto, a man known to be a puppet of the West. That's the fact. Also, he's a hypocrite, he's a liar. He speaks from both sides of his mouth. He says one thing, but he means the other thing. And he's willing to sell the Kenyan airport to Adani for an amount of 1.86 billion. And this airport, which most of you know, is JKIA, the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. It's a very busy airport in Eastern Central Africa, receiving planes, hundreds of them on a daily basis. They receive so many planes on a daily basis, and it's probably the most busy airport in that region, even more busier than the Ethiopian Bole International Airport. Now, so he wants to sell this airport to Adani Group for 1.86 billion for a period of 30 years. And what Adani will do is come in, take over the airport, take over the running of the airport, and to an extent fire some of the workers that were there, do renovation on the airport, construct some few shops inside the airport for duty-free shops, then collect fees, parking fees, everything, and run the airport for that years. They might even rename the airport from JKIA to Adani Airport or Adani International Airport. So that is what has made a lot of Kenyans scared that their country is quickly hurtling to the same destination that Sri Lanka found itself going to. And that is the breaking news in Kenya. And what happened is that the Kenyan president has been working with this man Adani for actually a long time. Probably he even gave him the campaign money he used to run for election, and now he has come back to collect. Now, how do I know this? About 3-4 months ago, the Kenyan president went to the United States. You remember that trip? It was the first state visit by an African head of state in more than 12 years, because the last time the US invited an African president or head of state to go there on a state visit was 12-13 years back, and that was Ghanaian President John Okofor, if I'm not wrong. And now when he went there was one thing that a lot of Kenyans were talking about. It's the jet that he used, the private jet, a private jet that was customized to have a very beautiful custom bed, bedroom suite, something like that. It had a suite, an onboard suite, and it had all these luxury things that made this plane spend 1.5 million for 1 day of use. So he hired that plane for about 3-4 days. So Kenyans were concerned that a lot of taxpayers' money were being spent on this expensive plane. But then the Kenyan president came and said, no, we never spent money on that plane. We only spent 10 million Kenyan shillings, which is an equivalent of $10,000. And these are money basically for fuel, I guess, and money that was spent to buy food, on board food, and so on. But the rest was paid for, according to him, by his friends. Now, these friends, he meant Adani or the Adani Group. That's what he meant. And you can go to the BBC and find that friends helped pay for the private jet. The story is there. He says that Kenya's president William Ruto has said that the private plane he used to fly to the US last week only cost about 10 million Kenyan shilling, which is about what, $60,000. Yes, actually 10 million is about $60,000, not $10,000. And following criticism that he was being extravagant. So he said some friends, and this is when he was talking about the Adani Group, of the country offered it at that price when he had opted to use the national airline to save the money. So Adani gave him the private jet to use, and the jet, as I said, costs 1.5 million every single day to hire. So it's a very expensive VVIP plane. And now that's when you get to see that he was working with this man all this time. All along he was working with Adani, and Adani wants to now take over the Kenya's airport. He also wants to invest in the same thing he was doing in Sri Lanka. He has actually incorporated a company in Kenya called Adani Transmission Company. Now the company has been spotted advertising for jobs of transmitting high voltage power lines in Kenya. So it's asking Kenyans to apply. And this job of high voltage power is currently being done by a government-owned Kenyan company called KETRACO, which stands for Kenya Transmission Company. And KETRACO is actually a very profitable company. It makes profit. It has never recorded loss. So because they just evacuate power from where it's generated, then they sell it to a distribution company, which is called Kenya Power, that sells it to people or businesses. So KETRACO is a profitable company, and it doesn't need a foreign company to come in and replace it. But the Kenyan president wants Adani to do that because, I don't know, they gave him a free private jet. They've probably given him some few islands somewhere, or maybe a beautiful summer house in Dubai, and he's willing to basically let them do the power transmission in Kenya. He has also let them, or he's going to let them, take over the Kenyan airport. And that's why the Kenyans are all over the place on the internet complaining about this deal. And as you can see, this is what I was talking about, that Adani, this is according to a Kenyan blogger, that Adani is already recruiting people for KETRACO. So if you go to LinkedIn, there's what they're saying, project director Adani Energy Solution Kenya. They are looking for highly qualified person with 18 to 20 years of experience. This is a director level, to help them run the company itself for power transmission. So that's the things I'm talking about, that they're already there in Kenya. They've taken over the country. They are working with the Kenyan president to loot the country. The Minister of Energy, the one you can see there on the screen, could not answer a single question on this deal because he was not involved. He's just in the office as the minister, but the president is doing all this behind his back. He doesn't know what is going on. The newspapers in Kenya is saying that the Kenyan president has compromised the 416 members of parliament. So they are even calling them the president's 416 puppets, because all they do is pass bills, rubber stamp what the president is telling them, and they are calling them from watchdogs. That's what the work of a member of parliament should be, to lapdogs. So these are the president's lapdogs. That's the newspaper for today. It was having this headline, and so on and so on and so on. Bottom line is, Kenya is being sold. Kenya, and I'm going to repeat this, is being sold, and very sooner Kenya is gonna end up in the same graveyard that Sri Lanka ended up in. A very promising country in Africa, one of the countries that could be the candidate for what the United Nations Security Council is proposing as a permanent seat for Africa on the UN Security Council. Actually, they've proposed 2 permanent UN Security Council for the continent, and South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, and Algeria are among the top preferred candidates to occupy these spaces. But look, Kenya is leaving the group of very highly capable countries in Africa because of their president. Now, I don't want to make this video so long, but I just want you to go to the comment section below and let us discuss. Do you think that the Kenyan people should quickly remove this Kenyan president before he destroys their country? Because that is what he's doing there.